Live from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in beautiful downtown Raleigh, it's the Science Cafe with your host, Chris Smith.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Science Cafe, everybody. Happy Thursday here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. My name is Chris. I'm your host tonight for the Science Cafe. It's a pretty cool job that I get because I get to kick off the show, introduce our guest speakers. They get to do a fantastic job, answer all your questions, and I get all the credit later. That doesn't happen, no. So welcome to the Science Cafe. Every Thursday night here at the museum, we bring in exciting people doing really interesting work in the realms of science and nature, bring them here into this space. You all can get dinner, get one of those delicious fudge brownies or a drink from the cafe, and enjoy a brief talk, and then we start my favorite part of the Science Cafe, which is conversation. So, for the program we have tonight, we're going to be talking about something that is relevant to everyone here, at least if you live anywhere within, a good part of central North Carolina, I think, if you get your water from the Neuse River. And if you're living in or near Raleigh, your water probably comes from the Neuse River from Falls Lake. So, this is very relevant to all of us because we are all here drinking water, right? Right, whether it's in your beer or if you just have a glass of water, either way, you're consuming water. This is important stuff. And how many of you are aware of how quickly North Carolina's population is growing? Yeah, right? We see it in the news all the time. The number keeps going up every year. I think last time I saw it, it's something like 70 people a day are moving into the Triangle area. And so there are a lot of different pressures being put on the water resources that we have in this part of the state. But think of all of the other downstream uses from us for water in North Carolina. North Carolina is a big agriculture state as well. So water is important not just because we drink it, but it's important for the economy of the state and for even more important things that matter to every single one of us because we're here in North Carolina dealing with it. So who is somebody who's thinking about all of these problems and their solutions, right? It's not just about problems. It's not just about what's going on. It's about the people who are out there doing the work to make sure that good things are happening in nature. That is Matthew Starr. They're already clapping for you. They're ready.
Nowhere to go but down.
Nowhere to go but down, he says. So Matthew Starr is the Upper Neuse riverkeeper with Sound Rivers. And I was chatting with him before the show. He said, no day is the same. So one day he'll be in a commission meeting talking about stormwater, and then the next day he's down in Goldsboro looking at the river. So I'm interested to see and hear the stories that he's got to tell us for tonight's Neuse River Magic Carpet Ride. So clap for him one more time and welcome him to the Science Cafe.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Matthew Starr. I'm your Upper Neuse riverkeeper, and I work for a nonprofit called Sound Rivers. We work to protect the Neuse and Tar Pamlico rivers and all the streams and creeks that flow in to those rivers, creating the river basin, and then as well as Pamlico Sound, where both of those rivers end up. And what we fight for every single day is fishable, swimmable, drinkable water. We want you to be able to catch the fish. We want you to be able to eat that fish you catch. We want to have water that you can go out and not have to worry about coming into contact with. We just want healthy water, which doesn't seem like that big of a want. However, as soon as the Neuse starts flowing, we have threats. And what we're going to do today is going to be a very quick magic carpet ride. We're going to start up here in the upper part of the river, which forms Falls Lake, and we're going to take a journey using Google Earth and a few slides down to the coast after the Neuse travels 248 miles. So we'll just get right into it. So this is an overview of the basin. As you can see, Sound Rivers covers a large portion of central and eastern North Carolina. And to really make that evident, we're going to pull up our first Google Earth. And all the blue that you see on the screen, that's surface water. So we're not just talking about the Neuse River. We're not just talking about the Tarpon River. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of streams that make up these two river basins. And this is what we're looking at is just the Neuse, because, you know, I'm the upper Neuse, so the Neuse is more important, right? And it's where we live. And like I said, as soon as the river starts flowing, it's facing threats. All right. Bear with me here. We're just lucky we have Google Earth to begin with. Right now, when I got here today to get this to work, my computer did not want to cooperate. So just bear with us. All right. Sedimentation is the #1 pollutant of North Carolina waterways. And it may not sound like that big of a deal. However, a river needs a healthy amount of sediment. And when we have sediment pollution, that is too much sediment, and our rivers end up looking like this. Our streams, our creeks, everything flowing to the Neuse end up looking like this. This is from a construction site. When you're building, no matter what you're building, you're required as a construction company to keep that sediment on site. And when it's not kept on site, it turns our streams and the creeks into something that looks a little bit like chocolate milk, which creates a whole slew of other problems. It causes dissolved oxygen levels to plummet. You know, what holds more water? Or, that was silly. What holds more oxygen, cold water or warm water? Just shout it out. All right. So when you have a silted-in stream that's baking in the summer heat, that causes the temperature of that stream to rise, which also leads to a dissolved oxygen problem. The silt will cover up the bed of the streams. It'll cover up where the stream fish need to live. It'll cover up where the microinvertebrates live, the little bugs and everything else that the fish eat. So too much sediment in the stream can really just kill the stream. And there's some big time neighborhoods, cookie cutter neighborhoods being built. For instance, this is the one in Johnston County. It's almost been built out. They're going to build a little more here and a little more here. And the reason I bring this one site up is this site had over 100 violations of the Sedimentation Pollution Control Act and the associated permits that go with that act. And that creates a culture of failure. So it's a failure from the developer, it's a failure from the regulator, and above all, it's a failure to protect our river. This river doesn't belong to an industry. These streams do not belong to the government. These streams are our streams and our rivers. And when you have a site that will pollute those streams with reckless abandonment, then that's a problem for all of us. And so one of the things I do as a river keeper is I will go out, usually after someone calls me and says, look, man, there is mud running all over this site. I walk the greenway, it's muddy, it's just a pretty common thing. If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't smell right, it's probably not right. And so we'll go out, and I'll go out and I'll take a look and I'll do an inspection. And it's quite evident that, again, the developer has failed as well as the regulations or the regulator. So that's one thing that we really try to hit hard on is getting compliance of these sites, because fixing sediment problems is probably the easiest fix that we have with the different types of pollution that we face. I told you I was going to go quick, so moving right along. We're going to travel a little further east. Whoa, no, wrong button. We're going to travel a little further east to Goldsboro, North Carolina. Right outside of Goldsboro, North Carolina, there is a coal ash pond. There's actually several coal ash ponds. owned by Duke Energy right on the banks of our river. And as we know from the coal ash spill that happened on Dan River, as well as the spill that happened at the H.F. Lee facility during Hurricane Matthew, that these coal ash ponds have many, many different types of pollution, usually associated with heavy metals. We're talking about cadmium, chromium, arsenic, known carcinogens that are 24, until this source, and there's old coal ash ponds over here, until this source of pollution is removed, it is poisoning the Neuse River 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's continuous. And here's two examples of what I'm talking about. The picture on the right, which looks a lot like that muddy stream that we saw on the previous slide. The reason that is orange is because of the huge quantity of iron and other heavy metals that is in that wastewater. And how do we know that? Well, we've sampled it. So the same lab that Duke Energy has to send their samples to, we send our samples to, and we share that with the public. And in this case, we used it in a legal challenge against Duke Energy, and now they're required to remove all of the coal ash off the banks of the Neuse River. The state didn't make them do that. They didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. They've known about the contamination for years. It took citizen action. It took the community of Goldsboro that this is just west of. The Goldsboro water intake is less than 10 miles downstream from this facility. It took a lot of fired up citizens, and it took a lot of good science for that to happen. The picture on the left is from Hurricane Matthew. And that is from the old coal ash ponds, not the triangle one that we saw, but to the left. It looks, if you didn't know any better and you were driving by it or paddling by it or flying over it, it just looks like trees. It looks like a forested area, but the forest floor is made out of coal ash. And so every time that we get a rain event or that, something like a Hurricane Matthew, well, it dislodges that coal ash. This is actually, the little white things are little tiny perfect spheres called cenospheres. And they're part of the fly ash byproduct that is used in the coal burning process. And they float, and they're perfectly round. And when we first found this, they would say, no, that's not part of coal ash. And of course, as soon as we saw that, we grabbed a sample, we hustled our tails back to NC State, put under a high-powered microscope, and sure enough, they're perfectly round. Nothing in nature that you're going to find is a perfect sphere. And it obviously looks like coal ash. So, and without citizen action, without science, everything that we say, everything that we do, we can point to science as our backup. That's what's really awesome about being a riverkeeper, is that we're doing the hard science. We're working with researchers. We're working with universities, we're working with labs, and everything that we do is backed by science. We're not out here just blowing hot air because we dislike something. Yes, we dislike it, but we're using science to prove our point. Oh, geez. So here's where that picture on the left of the coal ash spill that happened, or the dislodgement of the coal ash, that happened here. And yes, that is a stream running right between two old coal ash ponds. And so every time you get a high flow and that stream erodes, that's constant erosion into the Neuse River. And you guys might remember, so this picture here, that is happening not at just one place, but along the whole side of this wet coal ash pond. A couple years ago, Duke Energy stood up in court time after time after time in federal court and pled guilty to violations under the Clean Water Act. And the H.F. Lee facility was noted during that because you have one permitted discharge, excuse me, that's right here. What they did was dug a channel here and dug a channel here that collected all of that orange steep water and created another discharge, 2 other discharges into the Neuse River. And how did we know they were engineered? Because they put culverts in right into where they were going to be emptying out into the stream and river. All right, moving right along. And at the end, of course, we'll have questions, and I can get into more detail or show more examples. So I know I'm staying pretty broad on some of this. So we move further east, and now we're getting into, so we went from concentrated people feeding operations up here in Wake, Durham, Johnston counties, where we have lots and lots and lots and lots of people, and green grass year round. And green grass year round, you have to use a lot of fertilizer, and you have to use a lot of water, which that flows into our, so when you have water that comes down off your lawn or off a street and it goes into a storm drain, that storm drain goes into the nearest body of water. That storm drain does not go to a water treatment facility. And so whatever that storm water picks up and moves, such as your dog waste or fertilizer or oil from a leaky car, that goes directly into a storm drain, which goes directly into a stream or creek or Neuse River. So moving further east, we get into industrial animal agriculture. And that's been a big part of the news lately, is the industrial swine industry. So this is just one creek. This is Joshua Creek in the lower part of the Neuse. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and stay on the creek, and we'll just look at the sheer number of industrial swine facilities. Every time you see that, that's an industrial swine facility. This is an industrial poultry facility, more industrial swine, a huge industrial swine, another one. And then further down, it empties into the Neuse River. But you can see some here, you can see some here, you can see some here. And what that is, just like coal ash, it's put into an unlined, majority of the time, almost all the time, it's put into an unlined hole in the ground. Now, of course, there's a little bit more engineering that goes into that, but that's essentially what it is. And how they get rid of that raw waste that's in that open pit is to land apply it as fertilizer. Now, some of it surely can be a land applied as fertilizer, but we're not talking about once every 6 months. We're not talking about fertilizer from 100 hogs. We're talking about constant application of that waste from tens of thousands of hogs, and the average hog will produce as much waste as 7 people. So it's a tremendous amount of waste. And what we would like to see happen, you know, the opposition, those representing industrial swine and poultry operations would say that we want to put those folks out of business. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. We just want to stop spraying, and there's technologies out there right now at a price point that's affordable for this to happen. We just want to stop the spraying of waste into our environment and into our communities. We shouldn't have to choose between having food to eat at a reasonable price point and having healthy communities and a healthy environment. We can and we deserve to have both. And so that's what we've been advocating for around industrial swine and industrial poultry. And as you can see, this is just one snapshot. The Cape Fear River Basin, the river basin that's directly below the Neuse, it's 10 times worse than the Cape Fear. And so if that landscape in the Neuse is that bad, just imagine what Sampson County looks like. Those are kind of the big topics. Oh, I knew I had a PowerPoint for a reason. One of the other things we're trying to do is these pictures are from Hurricane Matthew. There are currently 62 swine facilities located in the 100-year floodplain, which is ridiculous. Those are the facilities most likely to flood, and as you can see from that bottom picture, the river has engulfed that entire facility. And of course, that means that waste does not stay there. It's going directly into our river, which flows directly into the Pamlico Sound, which is one of the most important estuaries in the U.S. It's a huge economic driver, it's a huge recreational commercial driver, and if you all enjoy seafood, or if you don't and you just want other people to be able to enjoy seafood, the majority of seafood that is caught off the coast of North Carolina originates in Pamlico Sound. And as a fisherman told me once, if you can't hatch them, you can't catch them. And so every time we have an event like Hurricane Matthew, or the constant pollution that happens every time that waste is land applied, then we're really destroying a very important ecosystem. And so we worked with the legislature, and one of the rare times that we came together with industry to get some funding appropriated to remove some of these facilities. Now the funding was just a drop in the bucket to what needs to happen to remove or to voluntarily buy out the remaining swine facilities in the 100-year floodplain. The poultry is a whole nother animal. Swine facilities are permitted. We know where they are. We know what they're allowed to land apply. We know how many animals they have. We know who's responsible for that. Poultry, there is no permitting process. We cannot tell you where all the poultry facilities are. We cannot tell you how many are in the floodplain. We cannot tell you how many are right beside our rivers, our schools, our churches, our communities, because there is no permitting program for poultry, which again is ridiculous. If they're going to be in our shared environment, our communities, and potentially polluting our water, we deserve to know where they are. And so that was a lot of doom and gloom. I hope everyone's thoroughly depressed after that. A few of the other things that we work on, I'm going to go back a couple slides here. That's just a little snapshot of some of the things we work on. We've been heavily involved lately with trying to protect some of the endangered aquatic species, especially those in the path of the proposed Complete 540 project. We've done a lot of work around Falls Lake, which is where over 500,000 people get their drinking water from throughout the entire city of Raleigh and some of the outlying areas. And if we have a drinking water source that is heavily polluted or has too many nutrients, then that's going to affect us all in the pocketbook. We're going to have to pay more to have that water treated to the standard that we're accustomed to having our drinking water. So less nutrients flowing, less fecal bacteria flowing into Falls Lake benefits not just Falls Lake, not just the recreation aspect of it, which has over 1 million visitors a year, but also protects our drinking water. And I think I've thoroughly hit my 20 minutes of depression. So I think we'll be ready to jump into some questions.
Let's give him a round of applause. All right. So what do you want to know about the Neuse River? I think he's the guy to ask. The way Q&A will work is that I'll try to pass the microphone around, so wave at me when you've got a question. I'll bring a microphone to you, and that's how it'll go. So I saw the first one right here on the front row. That's convenient.
When you mentioned the development down in Johnson County that had the 100 violations, when they open for business, how many of those violations will be corrected?
None. So what will happen is they'll build out that development, and once a phase is completed, there is no more sediment erosion control because the homes have been built, the streets have been paved, the grass has been planted. Therefore, your sediment erosion control plan, then you have post-construction stormwater. So as soon as it's built out, there's no enforceable action there.
How do you let it be known that there are 100 violations, or does that create such a negative impact from the politicians at that point that it's really difficult to make that known?
I'm really good at making negative impacts with politicians. So what we'll do is we'll present, and I've shared this information with the town of Clayton, their town council. I've talked with Johnston County. Public shaming goes a long way. We'll call them out on social media, and I'll get state inspectors out there with some teeth if the local delegated program won't do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you're actually maintaining connections with lots of different groups, public and private, in order to make sure that everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah, I clearly can't cover 248 miles in a 6,000 square mile basin, so it's important to keep those connections there so that we can have everyone working to protect our water.
And so how many river keepers are, like if you're upper Neuse, is there a lower Neuse? And then how many are on the Tar-Pamlico River? So
Yeah.
what's
Yep.
the network like?
So there are a number of river keepers throughout the state. North Carolina is one of the states that has almost a river keeper on every major river within the state. So we have the lower Neuse, we have the Cape Fear, we have myself, we have the Tar-Pam river keeper. The Neuse is the only super special one with 2 river keepers. We have river keepers on the Yadkin, Hall, Catawba, French Broad, Watauga, Green. Almost every major waterway in North Carolina has someone like me who is out there every day working for fishable, swimmable, drinkable water.
Here's a question. So I'm an outdoors guy. I like being outdoors. I'm curious, like those rivers that you're pointing to that are around the facilities, how large are they? And how are you getting around on them? Are you when you're working, are you in a rigid hull inflatable? Are you in kayaks? Are you in, four-wheelers? I mean, how do you get out and see what's going on?
Yeah, so down east, obviously, we can put some power boats on the river and get to places quickly. Some of these streams are only accessible by kayak, or the places that we need to go are by kayak. We do a lot of standing on tops of the truck and looking over a bridge and trying to see what we can see, pulling samples around there. And we also walk a lot of streams, simply because it's less time consuming. I can get out and walk until it's dark, as opposed to getting a kayak and then I got to figure out how I'm getting off the water, because it's just me up here. So I have to have a plan for getting on, getting off, so forth and so on. So there's a lot of walking up here, a lot of kayaking, and then getting on bigger boats down east.
I have a short question follow-up of when you were talking about the 100 fines or the 100 violations. So did they pay fines, and what are the fines?
No, there were
100 violations, but no.
To my knowledge, there were 2 fines that were levied against that developer throughout the years, and the fines are really subjective to whomever is out there doing those inspections. Obviously, I would advocate for, if you're that big of an actor or that bad of an actor, that you have a large fines as a deterrent to keep doing the practices that you're doing that are leading to those violations.
Okay, well, that wasn't really my question. So it was just, I wanted to follow up on that. But my question is, in today's current climate where there's a lot of deregulation going on and we're going backwards as far as losing my train of thought, the environmental regulations, what do you see affecting the Neuse, both, from the relaxation of state laws and federal laws?
Yes, so here in North Carolina, we cannot have a law or regulation, a state law or regulation that is more stringent than the federal law. So every time there's a federal rollback, there's a rollback of state law. And the legislators right down the street over there, State House, over the past 6 years have done a tremendous, and I mean that in the most negative way possible, job of rolling back regulations that protect water quality that we all use. And usually those regulations are rolled back for simple bottom line effects, whether that's with industrial swine or poultry, whether that's with buffers, the vegetated strips on the edge of streams. And yeah, it's an uphill battle. I was asked the other day what's the biggest threat to the Neuse River, and I said the legislature. And it really is, because we can be out there every day looking at stuff, and if there's not a regulation or something to fall back on, luckily we still have the Clean Water Act as a kind of a stop point, but that's kind of where we're at now.
That one here, go ahead. Where is the head of the Neuse?
The head of the Neuse is where the Eno and the Flat come together in the Person County area, with Falls Lake being built in the 70s to supply drinking water. You could say there is a channel in Falls Lake, but for all intensive purposes, you could say that the head of the Neuse is now where it empties out of Falls Lake.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you have to take Duke Energy or these hog farms to court, or do you take them to court, or does the who funds you? Who supports you?
So we're our nonprofit. The majority of our funding comes from members and donors. We have sponsorships from businesses, and we do get some grants to supplement our programmatic work. We have a great relationship with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and we make it work. It takes people who are concerned or just value the river and clean water to join Sound Rivers and make those donations that we're able to do this every day.
Could you describe some of the technologies, alternate technologies for the swine industry instead of these open cesspit lagoons?
Yeah. So one of the things that's been in the media lately are basically you line the lagoon, you put a tarp over it, and you capture the methane, which then you can use as a commodity to sell back to the grid. The only problem with that is that in the conversation of methane capture is that it concentrates the nitrogen within that waste, which is still land applied. So if you want to, we would totally get behind methane capture, but only if it included denitrification, so that we're not bettering air quality by compounding water quality. But it's important to have things like that, because what we really also want is not just the environmental aspects of it, but also so that we're not spraying raw waste into our communities, as we've seen through recent court cases that, folks that live in these communities have lived there for a long time, and they can't enjoy their property because of drift, of the odor, of a number of things.
Thank you. I had a question regarding the poultry industry. How come there's no regulation? Is there a strong lobby, or is Mr. Perdue involved in this?
Yeah, because they work the daggum good deal. When industrial animal agriculture was really coming to North Carolina in the early 90s, they worked a behind-the-scenes deal that left them unpermitted and essentially unregulated. I wish I had more detail, but that would have meant that I was there and I wasn't invited.
So I'm curious, what do Are there other organizations like Sound Rivers across the nation? And are the issues that you see in North Carolina, like on the Neuse River, similar across the country? So is it development and sedimentation that affects every river system? Is it agricultural runoff that affects every river system? And what's that network like for rivers across the country and people concerned about it?
So riverkeepers belong to a larger group called the Waterkeeper Alliance. Waterkeeper Alliance is a worldwide organization. We have waterkeepers, soundkeepers, baykeepers, riverkeepers on 6 continents. Yeah, I had to remember some geography from grade school, but yes. So, and many of the issues that we face are also prevalent in other river basins across the nation and across the world. Now, obviously, there's some places that are better. There's some places that don't have quite the concentration of industrial swine or poultry. But many of the issues that we face are being fought across the country.
I've got a few questions. So with the poultry, like, I mean, I really don't understand why there's not any regulation, because like when avian flu breaks out, then that's a, national health hazard. And yeah, there's the waste from that too, but they are like, so detailed about trying to prevent that problem. The other question I had was with the, multi-million-dollar cases of the swine pits, that neighbors have won because of the smells and everything. I mean, is that obviously helping you out? And the other question I had was, when you do clean up a coal ash pond, what do you do with all that toxic? What happens to all of that toxic waste?
So I wish I had a better answer for you all about why the poultry industry is not permitted. They just reached a back alley legislative deal that they wouldn't be permitted. As far as the swine cases that are ongoing, brought by the community members, I want to make this distinction against Smithfield Foods. Very wealthy, foreign-owned company. They're not suing the individual farmers. They are not. They are suing the corporation, and that is important to note. And that's based on nuisance law, which really doesn't have that much to do with the environment. However, it does bring it, obviously it's been in the press a lot lately, and so that does bring it to the forefront of people's minds, which we can then hopefully channelize into getting the industry, again, not the people who own the individual facilities, but the industry, the Smithfield Foods, to pay for the treatment of that waste. So you can remove the nuisance, you can remove the threat to water quality, and then they can do what's right for the communities and for the people growing their hogs. And that's what is not happening right now. And coal ash. So what they will have to do is they will have to excavate all of the coal ash down to a certain point where they're no longer detecting it, and it's going to be put into a lined landfill away from surface water, because right now our kitchen waste goes to a better facility than toxic coal ash.
Hi. So other than joining the organization, are there things that individuals can do? Are there activities we can join in? Citizen science projects we can participate in? What can we do to help?
Yeah, so obviously my executive director would say, please join the organization. It's how we stay afloat, but there's lots of things. So protecting the Neuse River and keeping our water clean can seem like a pretty daunting task. We talked about coal ash, industrial swine. Those are some big things that are challenging, but there's things we can do every day, such as picking up pet waste. That's key. Just simple, like going to a car wash instead of washing your car in the driveway. That reduces stormwater. If you go to a car wash, they recycle the water and use it again. If you land apply fertilizer to your lawn, check the weather. if you apply it before we have, 3 days of rain in a row, well, that fertilizer doesn't stay on your lawn. It washes into the street, which goes into a storm drain, which goes into a stream or creek, which leads to eutrophication of that body of water, which is where we see the algal bloom, the algae that's growing on especially like in the Chowan right now, which is in the northeast part. And so there's some common sense things that, well, I say they're common sense. If they were common sense, they wouldn't be problems. So there's some things like that that we can make sure we do every day. We do a big river cleanup every year. We just had our annual Loose on the Neuse River cleanup last weekend, where we got over 80 people on the water picking up trash. And then we have a fun after party. You deserve a fun after party after picking up trash in 100-degree heat. So you can follow us. You can sign up for our emails on soundrivers.org. We won't bombard you because we're the ones that have to write the emails, and no one wants to do that. We have social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything you can think of. We're trying to put our information out there. I've got some flyers up here as well that'll tell you how to follow what we're doing. Thank you.
Why'd you guys tear down the Millburn Dam? It's been there for 100 years and actually is making nice clean hydropower at one time, and last time I was there it seemed to be a pretty popular recreational area.
So mill burning was removed for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, it had nothing. The key reason it's not environment related is because there have been a number of deaths there over the years. Kids have drowned. Parents jumping in to save the kids have drowned. It was a privately owned dam. The owners wanted it removed. They were tired of reading about the unfortunate events out there. And environmentally speaking, returning a river to its natural setting is one of the most important things you can do to protect water quality. And so there's a cool feature there now. That dam was obviously built on a bedrock line that is now exposed. The river is lower. I take my kids out there. We swim around. We slide down the rocks. We worked with restoration systems to remove that dam. We've already had stripers and shad the first year that dam was removed, restoring the Neuse to its natural form in over 100 years, as you noted, swam up to spawn closer to their natural spawning grounds. And that's the first year. And so returning the river to a river and not an impounded stream is really important to the overall ecological health of the system.
You forgot one really important thing about what people can do. They can get out and vote for people, our legislators, who will support our environment.
I'm glad you said it.
Oh, we got one here, okay.
Go ahead, Katie.
I'll ask one.
Yeah.
So these hog lagoons and the coal ash pits, I mean, how old are those? How long has that been going on?
Yeah, so industrial swine really came into North Carolina in the 90s. Every time I say the word lagoon, I think of the movie Blue Lagoon, which is a beautiful, pristine body of water, and that is most definitely not what this is. So, I mean, cesspool it's probably a more apt description. What we're seeing is that they've kind of reached their lifespans, and so you're required to have only a small amount of the solid material on the bottom of the lagoon. That way, what you're lane applying is theoretically a little treated. However, we're seeing sludge islands in this lagoon, which means it's hardly doing any treatment. So the industry and the State Department of Environmental Quality is going to have a really big question to ask as to how are they going to address this, and then what is the funding mechanism to do that for all these facilities.
So they were sort of experiments when they were started. They thought it would work.
Yeah, I mean, they knew what they were doing because it had been done elsewhere. But, you can only design it for a certain time length before you have to either dig them out or redesign them.
I know this might not be your jurisdiction, but I was wondering, how involved the riverkeepers were with the Cape Fear River and the Big Chinooks. And I have family down there, and we're constantly wondering whether we drink the water at the restaurants or not.
Yeah, so you have a great riverkeeper, Kemp Burdett. He is based out of Wilmington. He is every day fighting for information, regulations, scientific knowledge around Gen X. What the riverkeepers throughout the state are doing is looking at other emergent compounds. And we work with a few different researchers, sampling that water, which is a really complicated process, but just looking at perfluorinated compounds and other contaminants that haven't really been studied. And as far as I know, we're the only place in the country that's just doing that. Again, the state isn't apt, our Department of Environmental Quality is not funded to a level where they can do it. So again, it's the riverkeepers who are looking at that. And then hopefully, I would say in the next, I don't know, 2 to 3 months, you'll see some press around that as we are able to narrow down and get our information correct.
Around 10 or 15 years ago, there was a lot of press about the fish kills on the lower Neuse. Haven't heard so much of that lately. Is that because you're doing a great job, or is there some other issue going on?
I would love to stand up here and tell you we've solved that and we've done a great job. Simply put, it's because it happens every year, and it's unfortunately people see it as normal. It is most definitely not normal. However, something that happens multiple times a year is a whole lot harder to get the public involved, to get upset about, because it does look normal. Fish kills should not be normal, and it's from a variety of different reasons. Nutrient and waste management is key there. And I talked a lot about waste from industrial ag, but there's a lot of waste that is spilled into our rivers and streams throughout the state from sanitary sewer overflows. So making sure that your local governments are properly funding those infrastructure projects, because just like a lagoon, just like a coal ash pit, they fail. And if you're not replacing them at the correct interval, you're going to have more raw human waste spilled into our streams as well. Yeah, we just had a 5,000 spill in Franklin County that went into Richland Creek, and then into the Neuse eventually. And with an SSO, or sanitary sewer flow, 5,000 gallons is pretty small. The big distinction between a sanitary sewer overflow of raw human waste as opposed to the continued spills or contamination from industrial animal agriculture is that as soon as there's a spill of 1,000 gallons or more, that has to be put out to the public. The industrial ag doesn't have to do that.
I have 2 questions. The state agencies that oversee the rivers and the waterways, do they work with you? Sometimes, all the time, not at all? Are they partners? Do you support what they do, or are you sort of the watchdog on the side, keeping them in line?
Yes to all the above.
Every day it's different.
So whenever possible, we're not regulators. Other than bringing a citizen suit, which if we brought a citizen suit for every time we saw a source of pollution, that would be an impossible task. So we have to work with the regulators who are able to enforce our state laws and regulations. And then sometimes we are on opposite sides of the table, and sometimes we actually sue the state because we don't think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, or we think what they have proposed is illegal under the Clean Water Act. So I would love to get to the point where we're working with them every day and we're like this, but we hold everyone accountable. We're here for the river and for the people that use it, which is everyone. So.
You said you take your kids over to the dam to swim?
Well, the dam's gone.
But where it used to be.
Correct.
So they're in the water.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I kayak, I'm always right around there, and avoid making contact with the water because we just didn't know. We put our feet in our hands, but we do not swim in it. But you saying it's okay? You're keeper in it.
So up here in the greater Raleigh area, you don't want to jump in the river right after it's rained because of that stormwater flowing in. After a day or two of no rain, you know, just know where you are. I'm not going to go swimming right below Duke Energy's coal ash pond. I'm not going to go swimming if it smells like hog waste wherever we're going. But up here, as long as you're not jumping in right after it's rained, then I do it. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Money is what makes things change. What is our state doing to stimulate money-making enterprises in the sounds and rivers in the state? Off the coast of Connecticut, between Connecticut and Long Island, there's a young man's been up doing it for 10 years or more. He's growing on these 20-acre parcels of the ocean floor. He's growing sugar kelp, and it's turning into an enterprise. If you think back 20, 30 years ago, the greens that are in our grocery stores, we weren't eating that stuff. And to think of eating kelp off the ocean floor, sugar kelp, it'll be an educational process to get us to eat things like that. But the money in it and the improvement in carbon dioxide is really significant. We're doing some of that vertical ocean farming with oysters and scallops down in North Carolina. But what is the thinking in our state as far as stimulating money-making enterprises that can raise some money to do the things that can turn around the negative aspects in what you're mentioning?
Yeah, right. Unfortunately, there's only really one example to give you, and it's the oyster industry that's in living shoreline that the legislature has funded. They've funded other projects that I wouldn't consider money-making enterprises. They're more just money-wasting enterprises, such as putting solar bees onto Jordan Lake. That's one thing that they were happy to fund. There was a new technology, luckily this legislation didn't pass, but to aerosolize, can't believe I actually said that, aerosolize landfill leachate, which is all the garbage juice at the bottom of landfills, to turn it into water droplets because that would somehow magically make it go away. But they have funded oyster restoration projects in the East. And so that's one thing we're looking at is, okay, you care a lot about funding the oyster restoration and groups and folks working on that. However, if the water is so contaminated, oysters filter, of course, everything that comes in passes through. And if the water coming into Pamlico Sound is just ruined by the time it gets there, well, then you've just wasted your money on your oyster restoration. So we're trying to leverage that to get folks to care about, decision makers to care about what's flowing into the rivers. I hope to have I'll come back in a year and hopefully I'll have a better answer for you on some money-making enterprises.
Several years ago, they said that they were changing the river basin plan from some into Neuse and some into Cape Fear. Now, what was the rationale? And is the tar and the little, do they feed into the Neuse?
The tar becomes the Pamlico. Are you talking about an interbasin water transfer from the Neuse to the Cape Fear?
They said, I saw signs that said this is part of the Neuse River Basin. And then 3 or 4 years later, it became the Cape Fear River Basin. It wasn't the Neuse anymore. And it's like,
someone might have just made
did they change the creek pathways or?
No, maybe someone just, they had extra Cape Fear River Basin signs and they just putting them out. No, the basin is the basin is the basin.
Okay. I thought maybe it was from Google Mapping, they could see where that things were going.
Oh no, they're able to tell from topography. So I'd like to see that sign though.
I noticed back in June when we were like having a drought, it looked like if you had some knee-high boots, you could have walked across the Neuse River at Clayton. And then when like if you got a hurricane coming up or something, they really open the water spouts. So I'm wondering, what's the ratio of the minimum flow to the maximum flow in the Neuse River?
So the Army Corps has to maintain a minimum discharge, and that is for having those flows downstream. There's a misconception out there that the dam has increased flooding during times of heavy rain due to discharge. But if you can look at the hydrograph that's released by the Corps and compare that to downstream USGS gauges that tell us the water height of the river, Falls Lake has actually greatly reduced the impact of flooding downstream from huge events. Now, something like a Hurricane Matthew, they waited a week to discharge, but then they obviously have to discharge quite a bit of water because they have to maintain the integrity of the dam as well. So you can have, like, you know, you go out to below the dam right now, it's in the deepest channel, knee deep. Which reminds me, one of the coolest facts about the Neuse is that up here you can walk across it down where it empties into the Pamlico Sound, where it's still a channelized river. It's the widest river in the United States, where you can barely see across it. I can't believe I forgot that tidbit. But yeah, so the Army Corps has to maintain minimum flow during a drought. That's obviously really hard to do, which does happen. But the flow would be decreased if the dam wasn't there to begin with, if we were in a drought.
So I was wondering before we end, if you could tell us how you got into this work.
It was, you know, what's every high schooler's favorite yearbook quote? It was a long and winding road. So I'm from Raleigh, born and raised. I'm one of maybe the few folks that are born and raised in Raleigh and stick around. So grew up here. I had quite a illustrious college career. Traveled the Southeast, experiencing different college towns, and actually joined the Army, spent a number of years in the Army, still continuing my college journey. My mom was happy to not have to pay for it anymore. And after a deployment, I had to figure out what I wanted to do because I was getting out of the Army, and I knew I didn't want to work in the government anymore, and I actually just was Googling around I knew I wanted to be in the water field, and I found the Neuse Riverkeeper Foundation, which formed with Pamlico Tar Riverkeeper Foundation a couple of years ago to form Sound Rivers. And I showed up. They had an intern job description, and I demanded that I have that intern position, and fell in love with it. And after about a year after the internship, after constant bugging, they gave me a job, and I'll die as a riverkeeper.
I think you should.
What now?
I think you should die as a riverkeeper.
I'm sure I will.
I'm just going to say that I think you're doing a great job, and that the Neuse River is better for it.
Thank you.
So, if you agree, you don't have to agree with me. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks everybody for coming out to the Science Cafe tonight. I hope you enjoyed the program. Maybe not. Well, okay, there you are. And I hope, let's see, on each of your tables, you've got a couple of things. One of them is for you and one of them is for me. So you've got some information about the Neuse and Tar Pamlico River system that Matthew brought. And then he's got more information about Sound Rivers up here at the front. So if you want one of his pamphlets, you can come talk to him right after the show. And then also on the tables, there's a little survey form. And even if you don't want to do the survey, if you want to find out about upcoming science cafes, what the topics and who the speakers are going to be, we do that via email and also on the museum's Facebook page. But if you want that email that lists the month's topics, write down your email address and then hand that off, or just leave it on the table to me or Katie. And that way we can add you to our list. That way you know what's coming up, because we want everybody to come out to the museum every Thursday night and take in our really cool programs. So thank you all so much for coming out to the Science Museum tonight. Hope that you enjoyed the program, and we will see you next week. Good night, everybody.